mining billionaire Clive Palmer. He could well be back in Parliament after this election, but this time with an extraordinary plan. Palmer, in the 2013 election, got his Palmer United Party in Parliament, 5 of them there were, until his party started to fall to bits. And at the last election, Palmer spent $80 million of his own money trying to get back in, but didn't win a single seat. This time he says he's spending $70 million. And today announced his economic policy in a speech before very hostile journalists at the National Press Club, who didn't actually seem much interested in any of the financial stuff, really. 1 or 2 were, our own Connell was. Others no. The journalists wanted to talk more about Palmer promoting non-approved drugs for coronavirus. But he wanted to talk about what he called the economic crisis about to hit us. Massive debt, sky-high interest rates, he said, and up to 80% of mortgage holders losing their homes. That was his warning. And his solution was this big new tax.
The United Australia Party will introduce a 15% export licence for all iron ore exports from this country, and will pledge the proceeds from that licence to be used for the retirement of the $1 trillion mountain of debt that Australia faces.
Clive Palmer joins me now. You want a 15% tax on our biggest export, iron ore. Why are you so sure that China especially won't then buy iron ore instead from giant mines that it's helping to develop in Africa, for instance?
Well, to develop the iron ore industry in Australia has taken really nearly 60 years. And to get that sort of volume, that's how long it will take China to do something in Africa, if there was the iron ore in Africa, which I don't think there is, and if there was a political situation where you could, which I don't think there is, and also that there's no ports that are available to ship it. So really, if we look at China's dominance in the world in manufacturing and exports, there's over $50 trillion invested in China, Japan and Korea in manufacturing, and that they're dependent on Australia because we dominate 75% of the iron ore export market. So we're at the bottom of the supply chain, but without us, their economies are ruined.
China is definitely trying to switch its supply from us to Guinea. A 15% export tax, that's just going to add to that desire to switch away from us, isn't it?
Well, of course, this is what happens when you don't know the full details about these sort of things. China imports around about nearly 1 billion tonnes of iron ore from Australia. The Guinea project, I think, is between 10 and 20 billion tonnes. It'll take at least 5 or 6 years to get on. Even when it's fully operational, it won't affect the amount of increased ore which they've purchased in the last 3 years. So they need a lot more than that, and they know that. And, of course, they use these shallow threats to say that. But the stark fact is, unless they have access to Australian ore and they get it quickly, the Chinese economy stops.
Joining me is Jack Keane. He's a retired 4-star general, former Vice Chief of Staff of the US Army and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. Speaking as a general yourself, Russians, tell us the extent of the Russian defeat, as it were, at least in the north, when you've got now something like 450 tanks we know of, as in there's photographic evidence, the real number is probably more, Russian tanks that have been destroyed. You've had no fewer than 7 Russian and Chechen generals killed. I mean, that strikes me as a layman extraordinary. As a professional, as a general yourself, how does the Russian army setback seem to you?
Yeah, any aspect of warfare that you touch here, dealing with the Russians, they come up considerably less than satisfactory. Certainly the initial campaign plan itself, attacking on 4 different axes into a country that's very sizable, not mutually supporting each other on those axes, each axis having to have its own integrated logistics support and air power. And they just couldn't do that. The campaign was overly ambitious and did not reflect the capacity of their own people on the ground. That would have been very challenging for the United States to have such an ambitious plan like that. And we've got more experience at this than the Russians do. And then when it came to their tactical performance, it was considerably less than satisfactory. I mean, they didn't do the normal battle drills on how to react to enemy contact and how to suppress fire and maneuver on that enemy. You saw probably videos of these long columns not being protected by infantry as they moved through towns and they were being ambushed. These are fundamental flaws in warfighting at the tactical level. And then at the leadership level, the Russians still have a Soviet model of leadership, Andrew. By that I mean the plan is made at the top, it's centralized control, and the tactical commanders below them do not have the authority to make decisions on their own based on their current situation, which is how most Western militaries actually perform on the battlefield, to include your great military itself. It reflects the democracy and adaptability that's in your society, and it operates very healthy in your military itself, but not in the Russian military. So they had huge problems there. They continued to stick with plans that were absolutely failing. They were throwing another battalion and another battalion after that into the same area, doing the very same thing that the battalion was just destroyed doing. It was stunning to us to watch that. And then the morale of the organizations began to fall apart because they were taking such heavy casualties, and they started to get combat refusals. They're still getting combat refusals in the east, in the Donbass region, within the last 24 hours of a unit that came in there out of Georgia and got into an initial fight and then refused to do anything more. And they're now out of the Donbass region back into Russia. It is stunning. The other thing they did, which surprised us, is they left their dead on the battlefield. They did not recover their dead. There is nothing more devastating to the troops at the tactical level who are fighting day in and day out to know that they're not going home to their loved ones in the event that they get killed. And that is just an incredible statement on the part of the Russian leaders to permit something like that to happen. Every aspect of their performance has been brought into question in terms of less than satisfactory. And their logistics system, I'm being generous by saying there is one.
Elon Musk is the world's richest man. He's just scraped together $4 billion of spare change to buy 9.2% of Twitter and become its biggest shareholder. This is huge. That's because more than 330 million people use Twitter. It's a hugely important way for people to communicate, particularly in journalism and in politics. So it's been really disturbing to see how biased Twitter has been, how this social media giant has used its power to censor and suppress. For instance, it banned Republican Donald Trump from Twitter and helped Democrat Joe Biden, Trump's opponent in the last presidential election, by stopping users from sharing damaging news stories about emails found in the laptop of Biden's son, Hunter, emails suggesting a very strange misuse of Biden's office to make money. And it seems that Elon Musk, he worries about this kind of thing too. A week and a half ago, he tweeted, "Free speech is essential to a functioning democracy," and he asked his readers, do you believe Twitter rigorously adheres to this principle? 2 million people voted online and 70% said no, Twitter did not adhere to free speech. Joining me is Sky News US correspondent Annalise Nielsen. What do you think Elon Musk is planning?
Well, I mean, you don't get to be a person as wealthy as Elon Musk without seeing some kind of business advantage to what he's doing. I'm sure he's going to make a lot of money. And we have seen in the past he's been in a bit of trouble with his use of Twitter, putting on things related to his stock prices. So the SEC has investigated that. But broadly speaking, I think this is actually going to be quite a pivotal moment for freedom of speech in the United States. We've seen pretty checkered history from Twitter about the suspension process and then the lack of transparency around that, especially when it comes to high-profile figures, of course, Donald Trump being the most high-profile person deplatformed by Twitter. So this is going to be a pretty critical moment where a lot of people are hoping that there might be a little more accountability about how that happens, because like it or not, Twitter is a pretty powerful platform.
Quite startling, even shocking documentary was aired in Britain a week ago. It was called Edward VIII, Britain's Traitor King. And it claims that the former king advised the Nazis to keep bombing England during World War II and also passed information to Germany that helped it conquer France in 1940. Now, we already knew that Edward, who abdicated in 1936 to marry the divorcee American Wallis Simpson, that he visited Nazi Germany the following year as the Duke of Windsor in what looked very much like a state visit, and he even met Hitler in a very friendly meeting. But these latest revelations go a lot further. Now, this documentary was based on the work of author Andrew Lowney, who knows a bit about traitors. He wrote an excellent biography. I've got it here. I recommend it. Stalin's Englishman, The Lives of Guy Burgess, spy for Russia. And he's now written Traitor King about Edward. And Andrew Lowney joins me now from London. What do you say that the Duke of Windsor actually did?
Well, he did two things. First of all, he had a job inspecting the French defences in the autumn of 1939. He passed this report back to the British, who didn't seem to show much interest, but it revealed that the Maginot Line wasn't impenetrable. You could just go around the side of it. And this information was passed to a man called Charles Beddoe, who was a German agent who had actually lent him his castle to get married in the summer of 1937. And Beddoe passed that material back to the German ambassador in The Hague, who passed it back to Ribbentrop. And this, of course, can be traced in documents which were found after the war, which we've known about for 60 years, these captured German documents, which were supposed to have been destroyed, but in fact were saved. And there was a huge fight after the war to try and suppress them. The second bit of information is that there was a plan called Operation Willie in the summer of 1940 to entice him to Britain as a puppet king should Germans invade Britain. And the line up to now is that he didn't really know what these approaches were about. But it's very clear from the papers I've seen, and these are papers in the Royal Archives, in the National Archives in London, but also private papers all over the world, that he actively engaged in this intrigue. He knew that the Germans were propositioning him. He actually made suggestions about how best they might subjugate Britain, including your remark about bombing London. So I think that the jury no longer could be out. It's absolutely clear that Edward VIII was a traitor and frankly should have been executed.
Walt Disney used to be a company you could absolutely trust with your children. Totally safe, producing family favourites like Snow White and Bambi, where the only controversy then was that it showed the death of Bambi's mum. But now Disney has gone woke and big time. And I'm not so sure it's that safe. Some Disney employees were furious with the governor of Florida, where Disney is a huge theme park, and that governor, Ron DeSantis, has a new law that the media left has falsely called the Don't Say Gay bill, claiming it's going to ban teachers from using the word gay and DeSantis must be a homophobe, etc., etc. Well, that's actually false, totally false. The bill says only that children from kindergarten to grade 3 shouldn't be instructed on sexual orientation or gender identity in a way that's not age appropriate. I mean, what's the fuss here? Sounds sensible to me. But this has driven the left absolutely nuts, and radical Disney employees demanded that the Disney company take a stand. The company first said no, but then buckled. Its boss then saying to staff, "You needed me to be a stronger ally in the fight for equal rights, and I let you down. I am sorry." And now Disney's going to fight that law against preaching gender identity to kids in kindergarten. The boss has even rung the governor himself. Plus, Disney's inclusion boss is now boasting that the company has changed the way already that workers in Disney World greet children to be more gender neutral.
Last summer, we removed all of the gendered greetings in relationship to our live spiels. So we no longer say ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.
No more boys and girls. What a nirvana. Joining me is Brendan O'Neill, political editor of the online magazine Spike. What worries you about this?
Everything worries me about this. I mean, it's got it all, hasn't it? It's got the woke corporation throwing its weight around in politics, which I don't think it's the business of woke corporations to do. It's got agitation to basically arguing that teachers should have the right to teach children about things that I think young children should not be taught about. Matters of sexual orientation, for example, or gender fluidity. These kinds of ideas should not be taught to children under the age of 10. And Ron DeSantis's bill, all it says is that children under that age should not be given classroom instruction on those kinds of issues. I really agree with him, and I really disagree with the woke left calling on big business to throw its weight around to try to scupper a democratic law. So the whole thing, I think, is a snapshot of how wrong wokeness is going at the moment.
You did say today the government's made an agreement with the United Kingdom and the United States to work on hypersonic missiles that can fly extremely fast. They can dodge as well, which makes them hard to shoot down. Yep. They can reach 2,000 kilometres from our shores. Which country are we protecting ourselves from, as if we all didn't know?
They can reach vastly further than 2,000 kilometres from our shores. These can be taken into basically low Earth orbit by reason of a missile componentry, and then continue to go round around the Earth till they decide to drop in. These are beyond the realm. They don't follow the parabolic curve, as you know, of a ballistic missile. These are they're hypersonic and they glide, so they change direction, which means they're very hard to detect and even harder to shoot down. Now, they've been developed by China and Russia. So if you're trying to defend yourself against a armament of another country and you're asking me which countries have that armament, well, it's China and Russia. Now, we don't want war. That's the biggest thing. Nobody wants war. Everybody loses in wars. People die, people get raped. They are disgusting, horrible things that we should give all our endeavours to bring about peace. But the only way you stop wars is with deterrence. And deterrence, weakness does not stop wars. Strength stops wars. And so we must become as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. And I say that ad nauseum because I mean it. And when we have China who are setting up or trying to set up a naval base in the Solomons, 2,000 kilometres from Australia's coast in Queensland, that is not because they feel there is a threat from New Zealand or a possible attack from the Antarctic. We know who they're focused on there, and we must accept that, and we must deter.
How can Russia still, after this, be a member of all bodies, the United Nations Human Rights Council, judging our human rights when it's committing this sort of genocidal murder and rape and torture on an industrial scale?
Yeah, so Andrew, I'm a long-term critic of the United Nations, and no single United Nations institution has been more infamously wicked and dreadful than the United Nations Human Rights Council. You remember once the United Nations decided that Zionism was racism, and the greatest speech ever given at the UN was by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the US ambassador, who said this infamous word will never be accepted by the United States. Well, the United States and Australia and like-minded nations should campaign vigorously at the United Nations for Russia to be expelled from all such bodies, so that those who would say Russia should remain in such bodies at least have to say so publicly. Now, on balance, I think it's better for us to be involved in the United Nations and all its agencies than not. But if we're going to be involved, we should at least speak the truth. We should not allow Russia to express an opinion on human rights within Australia